I've never done this in all the years. We've had a lot of different posts about different generations of the 9-inch and different discussions about the different wood baits and everything, but I've never gotten an example of all the different ones out at the same time and kind of looked over them. And Jake's passing has sort of inspired me to get this stuff out and kind of look through it and reminisce and kind of think about some of the reasons why these baits have become so important to me over the years. So we have to start where it all started, and that would be with these the wood large baits, wood baits in general. I've sort of placed these guys in order. I've got a few more wood ones, but they're all of the kind of standard 13-inch variety for hook. But here's some earlier 13-inchers. And you notice the painted eyes. This one's got glitter. The copper, obviously, they all have the copper through wire. And then this would be a later one. I think they thought around the same time as the M9. You notice that it's got those same doll eyes or glass eyes or whatever you want to call them from the 80s. And I know we've found some of these dated in the late 80s, the wood baits. But you see the newer ones have the glass eyes, and a lot of times the lips and the paint jobs are a little bit more refined, or I guess more in line with what you normally see with some of the more modern baits. But a couple oddities here, like 11-inchers. This 11-incher has a very unique lip, a dish lip, round. And I found this one, I don't remember, somewhere eBay or something, and sent it to Jake to have him take a look at it and sign it for me. And then he was gracious enough, him or Kenny, gracious enough to sell me one of these very unusual tapered body. The body is the shape of a wing on a plane, almost an aerofoil, but it's got that same dish lip. And this would be the only wood ones that I know of that have cotter pin and sort of regular hardware. And that's just due to the thinness of the body. These baits are made of redwood, not cedar, but redwood, and you might be able to see that through the paint in a few spots. But so one more thing I'd like to touch on before we move too far off the early stuff is, and this is straight from Jake, told me, and I took notes. So he said in the 50s and 60s, him and his dad would travel up, I believe it was about 400 miles, to Little Jack Lake in Canada, and they would. I asked why did he start making these baits? And he said because the usual stuff, the creek chubs, the heddons, I don't know what the other one is, but they weren't big enough. They needed bigger. And nothing was out there. So necessity bears invention so often, and obviously this is a pretty important one. So and also I asked why it was called the Grandma, and he said that his dad said that the lure wobbles like an old grandma walking down the street. And you gotta love that. So all the history here, and just amazing. Along with that goes probably one of the most famous musky lures in history, the M9 Grandma, standing for minnow 9. And this would be a wood one of only 5 or 6 ever produced. This one has a beautiful, I don't want to call it a foil, but it's, I believe, a type of fabric, metallic fabric, and it's a beautiful flash, but it looks like a foil. And then we move up to the generations of the Grandmas, the M9. This would be a first generation plastic, and it was like called butyrate, I believe. Sort of a kind of blown glass type of plastic, and it's actually 2 sides, and it's got very small brass wire ties. or line ties, often mistaken as wood. If you look at the bottoms, a lot of times where that sanding is from the molding marks, people think is wood. And you'll notice the lip is very plain, just says Grandma on it, flat and no dish. Then we move into the second generation M9. This would be the one where the name M9 really became synonymous for musky fishermen, and that is because it's right on the lip there. It's got a dish. It's got the applied eye, which a lot of times you lose. But one of the best trolling baits, and realistically, probably, in my opinion, one of the best twitching and jerk baits ever. And then maybe a little bit of more of an oddity, the J9 Grandma, which is a jerk bait version. You can see the lip, and then some of the applied foiling. So this first generation would be 1980 through 1984. And we'll get into that a little bit more when we get to the packaging. And then 1985 was the applied eyes, and those guys, they ran, doesn't sound like for as long. Nobody was quite sure as exactly the years, but until the mold burned out or something happened with the molding company, and they moved on to Magna Strike. So that would be Magna Strike, the bubble eye or bug eye, or however you want to call it. I think Kenny calls it the bug eye. But again, one of these just incredible trolling and twitching baits, and something that I use on a regular basis still. I've got a bunch of war horses. If you're lucky, you notice these ones don't have a rattle, but then this guy's got rattles, and probably of my, I don't know, I probably have 40 of them, about 6 of them have rattles. This is one of my favorite of those, because one thing Magna Strike did really well is they used pearlescent, very odd pearlescence, and to me reminiscent of the old 50s and 60s Christmas decorations. And we'll get back to that in a little bit too. And then of course then you get to the modern ones. This is one of my workhorses. It's actually won me some, I think about $800 in a tournament. And then this is one painted by Tom Stinson, who does great work in a peacock bass. Thought it was a neat one to add to my collection. So then let's take a look at the packaging throughout the years. I'm told the first of the first gen plastics came in this package with no screen printing on it, and also there was 4 patterns originally, and that would have been the perch, the white, I don't know what you call this, like a sort of a white perch type of thing, strawberry, and then that orange coach dog, which is orange with black dots. Those were the only 4 in the first run, the first 2 years from what I understand. And then you'll notice in those, you'll notice the I don't know if you can see it, but it's actually screen printed scale, very, very small and very well defined scale. You'll see that also on this guy. But those were of the earlier 1980 to 1982. 1983, they've opened up a lot more color options, and also opened up the packaging. So here you've got the second version of the real hard plastic packaging that's got the screen printed logo on it. Still comes with the same slips and stuff. Neat old Grandma logo in the shape of the Grandma. And you'll see some are a saltwater version where they've got the zinc or whatever hooks. So a couple of versions of that. Then we get into the M9s in the other plastic, later version. This would be 1985-ish, and you see 2 versions here. We got the jerkbait model with the J9 with the shorter lip, and then also the M9 normal lip. Basically the same packaging, but just 2 examples. And then when we get to Magna Strike, the packaging changed again, and this is one I got from Kenny, from the Satonica family, and that's like a fluorescent jailbird. Kind of a neat one, and an example new in the package. So, and then probably less known, here's the little 4-inchers. I don't think these were newer. I don't even remember where I got them, but just thought I should have them for the collection. And then probably not talked about a lot, but are the 6-inch models. And you notice that the earlier ones here have Grandma just stamped on a pretty generic lip. I shouldn't say generic, but then the later ones have the reinforcement on the backing. And here's one version of each of those too in the packaging. The older one and then the newer one. But this one, talking with Jake about it and also talking with Kenny, is unusual. The lip is handmade. It's not wood. The bait's not wood, but the lip is handmade, and it's not marked. Also, the paint job's rather unusual, and it's marked JT. And talking with the family, that would be John Thompson, who was a friend or co-fisherman to Jake. And he said that typically when they marked it like that, it would have been a situation where they did that in tournaments in case they lost them and it would get returned. But the consensus would be that this would have been a prototype of the 6-inch, and John gifted or sold that to John Thompson to try, much like the big wood baits. So I was lucky enough to buy that directly from John, and the story corresponds. It's pretty neat. So a couple oddities, and maybe even just to clear up things a little bit. This is a bait made by Magna, and I think it's called the Intimidator, something like that. But you'll notice that same weird pearlescent paint, and I think that's so neat. But that such a neat iridescent that, again, to me reminds me of like an old Christmas tree ornament. And then this is an odd one that I bought from a guy out east, and he was, I don't know, I think he's fed me a story, but it's got an unusual lip. It is a first-gen plastic. It is signed by Jake, and that's why I bought it. But it's got goofy hooks on it, and it's got this little bucktail end and a goofy lip, and clearly been painted. And Kenny doesn't think that John had anything to do with it necessarily, just probably the guy brought it to a show and was proud of it and showed Jake, and Jake signed it for him. So one thing to maybe touch on a little bit, and I won't go too in-depth into it, no point, but you see these J10 Jake. This would be a very early version of the Jake bait, and you know, the story behind it is widely contested, and I've heard the Satanica's family side, and that's pretty much the only side I need to hear. But I made the mistake of asking Jake about the Jake bait, and he said, to put it frankly, that is not my bait. That's that son of a bitch Pete Mayna's bait. So let's laugh about that. And and I apologized for asking him about it, but part of the history, right? And a history that lasted nearly 70 years. So I thought it would be kind of neat to just take a look through the years, through the incredible legacy. You think about starting in the early 1950s, and all these different bait designs and all these different companies and the different things and the tumultuous relationships and back and forth and whatever. But boy, what a legacy and what a history, and how many fish have been caught on the Grandma bait. Probably an untold and unfathomable number. So Jake, you're a legend, and your legend will live on in these baits, no doubt, for the rest of history.